Good morning. It is Sunday, February 12th, and here we are, another podcast for Iconic Freedom, the formula, talking about accountability and responsibility, something that our world could probably use a lot of these days. Today we're going to go into an interview with a young lady who's really going to talk about some background of hers, being excommunicated from a church, finding her way with her daughter, moving across the country, and kind of taking ownership of her life. It's a fascinating story. This is part one. Part two will be next week. Please enjoy.
Anyway, so I got excommunicated, and it was sort of a natural development, although I can't say I even made healthy choices for myself to get to that point. Regardless, they were my choices. And be that as it may, I decided that I didn't want the whole religion thing anymore, even though it was a difficult break because my relationships were severed. I mean, once and for all, essentially, except for a couple exceptions. I'm including my parents and family members that I was very close to, and other friends too. And I didn't have any other friends or family. And what family I did have, I was severed previously because they weren't in the church. So I have since developed some closeness to family members that I didn't know growing up. So I guess you could say I've made up for a lot of that thing.
So, and do you mind telling us what the church was that you were excommunicated from?
Oh yeah, it was Jehovah's Witness.
Jehovah's Witness. Okay.
Yeah, and there was somewhat their beginnings were back in the 1870s. They were an offshoot of Seventh-day Adventist, and it was during a resurgence of evangelicalism, or what I want to call it. Back at that time, there were many of those religions that were that developed from then at that time. At any rate, so anyway, that's what I grew up in. And I'm, like I said, I was fifth generation. So it was pretty steeped. My family is very steeped in it. So at any rate, so when I finally was out of that, it was a difficult process because I didn't have any social structure or even people that were really close to me, except for a handful that I had met recently, during that time. And but I did decide I didn't want that. I didn't want that because I wanted to live my own life. And so essentially, the story, as a story has it, like I said, I didn't make the smartest choices. So I was in a couple relationships that were very unhealthy, and they lasted a couple of years, and I decided that I wasn't going to have that anymore, and I ended up being single for a long time, but that's when I really developed, I think, more than anything else, being alone, except for my daughter, of course. And I guess you could say she was probably a motivator in me wanting to make healthy choices, because I wanted to be a good example for her, and I knew that I hadn't done that in at the time recent past. So essentially, I went and got my education on it, and this all happened actually during my education, going to the university, and just working my way through that, and getting rid of the bad influences in my life through my healthier choices. So it was all helping, I know, for my daughter, and she's 32 now, and I'm so glad I did. Because she has turned out to be a really good girl. Of course, she can take credit for all of her smart choices. But yeah, it's I guess I guess as we talked before about a flashpoint. A flashpoint was essentially wanting to make better choices for my daughter and wanting for her to live her own life. And I knew that I had to take responsibility and accountability for my choices, including relationships, and being independent and working at a job that would bring my life integrity, and to be independent.
So before your flashpoint, though, do you feel like you had maybe some defense mechanisms that you were kind of maybe deluding yourself, or
Absolutely.
yeah, and I mean, do you recall any of what that looked
Yes.
like for you?
Yes, I do. And this is a really very specific one. I remember, and I was still in the church, and I was, quote unquote, the single mother, and I cannot stand that term, the single mom. So I went ahead and applied and it got accepted after a while for basically subsidized housing. Right. And I allowed others to basically help pay for my living expenses, essentially, is what happened there. And so I guess you could say, well, I've been paying into it, right? Why can I do this? So I guess you could say that was a defense mechanism. And I took advantage of the socialistic type things like food stamps and things like that when my daughter was really small. And of course, I realized I cannot do that. I cannot allow myself to live off of others' hard work. And so I did. I gave it all up. And I just had to pave my own way.
Wow, that's huge.
I think that is a really big one. Of course, I have funny stories about that. Can I tell one?
Please, absolutely.
This is so funny. During part of this time, I ended up with a 1976 Dodge station wagon, complete with the wood paneling,
oh boy,
sides, and the luggage rack, 8-track tape, the whole thing, right?
Oh, wow.
And it was $400, and I moved to Scottsdale to be close to my daughter, because during all the process of everything, my daughter ended up moving in with her dad, which was in Scottsdale. So I'm going, well, I not only need to be out of this situation of being dependent on the government or the others, taxpayers' dollars, I need to go get my own thing. So I moved in to an apartment that I could actually see her schoolyard and her classroom from where I was. So she had access to us, and I was paying my own way at the same time. So that I felt, and I do believe, is a lot healthier, being a mother and also being independent. So I drove that big tank. It was stuffed full of all my belongings, right? And I mean, it even had the rocking chair and the luggage rack. I kid you not.
You got a Beverly Hillbillies thing going on there.
Oh, I just remember cracking up laughing just as I'm driving that thing out this way.
That's fantastic.
I don't live in Scottsdale anymore, but I guess I'm, at any rate, I don't live there anymore. But it's quite a story. Quite a story.
Wow.
And I always get giggles when I think about it, how huge that car was, and it certainly got me where I needed to go. So it was awesome.
So it's kind of interesting that you kind of have this epiphany. You become excommunicated from the church, but so what was the flashpoint for the church? I mean, how did that come about? Because people don't just all of a sudden wake up one morning and go, I think I'm gonna stop believing what I believe.
Exactly. And you know what? I have to, as far as that was more of a gradual thing, to be quite honest. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until after I was out for probably a year or two before I realized that it's all BS. The religion, not just that religion, the majority of religions are just an element of control, just like a bad cultish relationship would be. You can have a one-on-one relationship that's a cult, or you can belong to an organization that controls you. Jim Jones, hello.
Right.
So, that's what I realized at that time. And of course, I did all kinds of reading. And I investigated other religions and that type of thing too, and which was a huge no-no from where, as far as the dogma of where I came from, is forbidden to do investigations and all of this and that. So I was, I guess you could say, an absolute rebel when it came to doing research into other things because it was forbidden.
Right.
Forbidden before. So, and what I found out was, at least for the time being, I was an atheist for a long time. And I read lots of Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris and Ayn Rand and even what's the guy's name? Some philosophy things too.
Sure.
That were I would even categorize it a little woo woo, and I can't even think of the names. Wayne Dyer. I thought he was really good.
Oh yeah.
I thought he was very good, and I think he's actually was. Sadly he's passed, but I think he was actually a religious guy too. But so I have since have become agnostic because I don't know, and I don't want to leave. I don't want to be so stubborn that I won't consider any evidence, if that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. I used to have a conversation with my father all the time, and we'd get off the phone, and right before he'd always ask me if I'm still atheist, and I'd just be like, "No, Dad, I'm agnostic like you are." And he would say, my dad was devout Catholic. I mean, he would go to Latin Mass. And he was just like, I'm not an atheist. And I said, well, you are agnostic. And he's like, no, I'm not. And I go, well, you are. I just go one more God than you. I was like, you've made kind of that choice. So you moved to a place, I think, in your life you mentioned before where you kind of questioned absolutely everything.
Yeah. And I haven't stopped.
Which is great. Yes. Right? That's always
I won't
good.
Stop. I think that is part. I know a lot of people are uncomfortable with not having something rock solid or whatever.
Sure.
But I'm more comfortable not knowing because that gives you endless possibilities.
Well, and life is a path of one, right?
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, it truly is. So you moved to a place where you were questioning everything. You no longer had beliefs. You had observations.
Yes.
And so then, I mean, did you find that you had some emotional, like, was there any anger, bitterness, anything like that was coming up for you?
Oh yes, lots of. I guess you could say even some anger issues or bitterness, and because my family disowned me. I mean, I was good as dead, essentially. Especially my parents, and I just can't. I still can't understand that. But although I'm not bitter anymore, I understand, thankfully, because that just hurts me, and I don't want to be bitter. But as the years have gone by, I'm able to accept the fact that my mom has passed now, but I choose to, and I choose to remember mainly, or I'll say focus more on the good stuff, the positive things that my mom and dad both taught me and were good examples for. The hard work ethic and being a good neighbor and just basically a good human being. And that's certainly a conversation that I have had with my mom because when I would drop my daughter off because I didn't want to, I can't believe you're an atheist. Oh, she would just go on and on. I go, and Mom, I'm a better Christian now than I was before.
Right.
Because now I choose to be a good person. And thank you for the example,
Well, and basically you're no longer image building, right? You don't need to image build to say, I want people to see me as a good person. You are a good person, and that comes from within, right? And it gets, the expression is outside of us that way. But for so many people in religion, they're always trying to be something that they're really not, and oftentimes they're trying to signal, virtue signal, the person that they want to be rather than trying to be that person.
Yeah. And that is so true my parents were image builders for sure. I mean, in fact, that's one of their dogmas, or one of their tenets, is that they seem to care so much about what others thought of them, and of course, being a true cult, they had to do things so differently, their language and the way they ran their life, if you know what I'm saying. But
sure.
And that was part of their image building too, at any rate. And you're exactly right. No longer image building. But as far as no longer being bitter, I guess I've just accepted the fact that my father is still with us, and he's a decent person. I mean, he's a good man. But I've accepted the fact that he is what he is.
Sure.
That's all. And I do call him now and then just as a wellness check, because I love him,
Sure.
And that's about it.
So do you think that being able, so you mentioned about the bitterness and, those kinds of things. Do you think that it was through the ownership of your own choices that it just kind of, after a while, that bitterness, just kind of dissipated because you realize, well, I made choices in the face of all of that.
Right. Because I knew what was going to happen. I mean, well, I knew the separation or the, what do they call it? If I didn't go back, nothing would change with them.
Right.
I would still be the black sheep and can't associate with me. So I knew that wouldn't change. So I guess you could say yes, although I had never coupled the two together as far as taking accountability for that choice. I mean, it was a direct choice because I've had plenty of opportunity to go back, right?
Sure.
And heck, I still do, for that matter. But it would be such a compromise. I just can't do it. And I know people who've done it where they faked it so they could have their family.
Sure. Which is just another choice.
Right. And I just couldn't do it. And that's no judgment on them. I mean, if that's what they wanted to do, that's fine. But I just didn't have any energy or desire to basically be two-faced,
Sure.
It just wasn't going to happen. So, yeah, I guess you could say that's a definite part of it, because I do know that what was going to happen if I never go back, for sure. And I'm a much more, I'm just a independent person now, and moving forward and in really some, I think, amazing ways.
And that's going to do it for today. A couple of shout outs. One to my friend John, whose birthday is February 15th. I know this will embarrass you, so happy birthday. Also to my second subscriber, Dan. I love you for that. Thank you so much. My mother, her birthday is tomorrow, February 13th. Had she been around, I'm sure she would have loved this podcast. But happy birthday, Mom. Hey, give a thumbs up and subscribe if you are so inclined to do so. Check out any of the links below for Twitter, Truth Social, all that kind of good stuff. And I will see you here next week.